I've been reading But We Are Not of Earth by Jean E. Carl from 1981. I'm enjoying it thoroughly, even though it's a very short book. I'm not done with it yet. And it got me thinking the young adult sci fi and fantasy from the 80s is a really untapped genre as far as BookTube and a lot of reviews that I've read. And I thought it would be cool to go over some of the books in this genre that I've read in the past couple of years. This is just going to be a casual flyover and recommendation. I'm not going to go super deep into analysis, or some of the plots I don't even remember quite specifically. So I would recommend you seek them out on Goodreads, read some user reviews. I'm going to have a link to my own Goodreads in the description of the video here. I would love for us to be able to follow each other, so go find me there and we'll connect. But We Are Not of Earth is so enjoyable that it inspired me to make this video. It is a kind of cool adventure novel that will kick off this whole discussion, and it is one where I will give a plot synopsis because the blurb on Goodreads is only 2 sentences long. So 4 students from Meniscus F on a mission to the faraway Sector 22 delight in the habitable but uninhabited planet they discover until they realize their pod mentor has plans he has not shared with them. So again, a very simple premise, a very simple book, but the characters are well done, the writing is well done, it's very easy to read. And that's another big point about this genre, is that I've used it many times to pull me out of a reading slump. And because it's these books are so easy to read and they just flow nicely, they're uncontroversial. A lot of them have relatively low stakes and they're not like super traumatic or anything. I just tend to gravitate towards these books lately, especially very recently. I've been in a crazy slump where I have a lot of brain fog and trouble focusing. Not sure what it is, but it's something that I'm working on. So when I do focused reading time as soon as I wake up, I've been leaning on titles like this to kind of resharpen my reading skills. And I'm not a fast reader, so that's why, I've been reading But We Are Not of Earth for a little while now. And even though it's only about 175 pages, I'm only halfway through it. Anyway, let's get on to some other recommendations. A couple years ago, I read The Wind Duology by Rebecca Mellock, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. However, I read them out of order. I read Windchild first. That's actually the second book. I didn't realize it was part of a duology. It should have been quite clear based on the setup of that book. You could tell there was an adventure that took place before it that you were only getting kind of a recap of. But it didn't take away from my experience when I went back and read Wind Dancers. This is basically like space fantasy, and I remember the feeling that it gave me when I was reading it was somewhat of space adventure movies, like Star Wars kind of thing, and maybe that's what she was going for. These books came out in 1981 and 1982 respectively, but I enjoyed them both quite a bit. Next would be The Blue Sword and The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley. This is probably one of the best known ones that I'm going to talk about today. It's very well loved, and it is one that is very specifically designed by the author to be read in the order she wrote them, even though The Hero and the Crown is the prequel to The Blue Sword. So a lot of people think, oh, you could just read Hero and the Crown first. But really, and again, the author is very adamant about this. If you read interviews with her about this duology, is that you read The Blue Sword first and you learn the legend of the hero in The Hero and the Crown. And then you read The Hero and the Crown and you find out kind of what really happened and how legend affects culture and all this other cool stuff. And as far as like deconstructions of genre go, I'm not like a huge fan of that because I feel like nowadays it's really super overdone. But these books, written in 1982 and 1984 respectively, are very thoughtfully done and not just a deconstruction that just kind of does the opposite of what your expectations are. So highly recommend those. Next one is one where I've only read the first book. It's Where the Knee Lock or Where the Knee Latch. I don't know how to pronounce it. By Marcia Bennett. The first one came out in 1983, and the sequel, The Shadow Singers, came out in 1984. I haven't read The Shadow Singer, but I quite enjoyed Where the Knee Lock. It's about a young man who's part of this race of humanoid people who is thought to be extinct, but he's kind of hiding in plain sight. People don't realize he's part of this race that is, they were kind of genocided, and he's being protected by a mentor character. And the adventure kicks off pretty early in the book and just kind of goes from there. There is an element of romance, and it's set up quite well for the sequel, The Shadow Singer, which I will read at some point. Next up, I have one that I read quite recently and enjoyed maybe the most out of this whole bunch, except for the last one. I did save the best for last here. But before we get to the last one, this is The Curse of Sagamore by Cara Dalkey. This came out in 1986. There is a sequel called The Sword of Sagamore from 1989. I haven't read that one yet, but I finished The Curse of Sagamore a couple of weeks ago. And again, thoroughly enjoyed it. This one is kind of a comedy. It has comedic elements, sarcastic tone to it. It's very well written and it's very easy to read. The prose is very straightforward and the chapters are short. So you can pick it up, read a chapter. You're only reading 2 or 3 pages. If you really want to bail and come back, it's easy to take it in little bite-sized chunks. It's about a prince whose family was given the throne 4 generations ago or something, where his great-great-grandfather was the court jester, and the king back then, for reasons that you discover as the book goes on, abdicated the throne and gave his crown to the jester instead of his family. And you follow the prince, who is the ancestor of this court jester who became the king, and the implications of that and what happens in the kingdom and the royal family. It's all very creative and funny, and I really liked it. Now, my one call out with this book is that it's the only one that has adult situations in it. I wouldn't recommend this for young readers. It's not explicit by any means. It's not graphic, but there is a plot point involving the main character having relations with another character. And it actually, I'm conflicted about it because it serves the plot in a really cool way. But I don't like to consider books that are YA. And now as I read the book, I'm thinking, okay, what are the ages of these characters supposed to be? Because now in my head, everybody's minimum 18 years old. Otherwise, I'm just not feeling great about what's happening here. So, and I could have missed maybe the characters. It was mentioned what their ages were and they're all of age and everything's cool. But that's just my one call out there. If you don't want to read that kind of stuff, again, if you're my age, I'm in my 40s, it didn't like offend me. But if you're considering a book YA, I don't like when it has that kind of stuff in it. Last but certainly not least is one of my favorite series of all time. And I am cheating a little bit here because this video is themed on YA sci-fi and fantasy from the 1980s. This series was started in the 60s and generally went through the 70s. And that is the Dark is Rising series, the Dark Sequence. It has 5 books written by Susan Cooper. The first 2 books are interchangeable as far as which one you read first. And if you're only going to read one book, just read The Dark is Rising. It's actually one of the best. It's probably the best YA book I've ever read. It's one of the most beautifully written things I've ever read. Rich characters that you will root for, that you will look up to. These kids are brilliant, smart, do the right thing, but they're not Mary Sue's. They do face conflicts. They do make mistakes. I just love their camaraderie with each other. And I read the whole series just because I loved it so much. I can't recommend it highly enough. So check out The Dark is Rising. Check out everything I recommended here. These are all, above average or decent books. Curse of Sagamore, Dark is Rising are great, great books. So thanks for hanging out with me and talking about books, and I'll see you on the next video as I bop my nose on the microphone. Take care.